You just filled up your car. Maybe 20 gallons. Maybe $60. You didn't think about where that fuel came from. You never do. But here's what actually happened before it reached your tank. That oil moved on a ship. A very specific kind of ship. One that changed its name 3 times this year. One that has no real insurance. One that a scrap dealer in Bangladesh would pay $10 million to destroy right now. But instead of sitting on a beach being cut apart, the ship is somewhere in the Indian Ocean at this exact moment. Invisible, carrying 2 million barrels of crude. And someone just paid $50 million to keep it alive. That is 5 times what it is worth dead. And the reason that number exists, the reason an old rusting tanker is suddenly worth $50 million to a mailbox in Dubai, is a story that connects the war in Ukraine to the price of rebar in your city. To the apartment building that just went over budget 3 blocks from where you live. To a beach in India that used to recycle more steel than an entire European nation and is now running out of ships to destroy. This is the Scrapyard loophole. And once you understand it, you will never look at a gas station the same way again. Stand on the beach at Alang, India, at low tide. What you see does not look like an industry. It looks like a graveyard for giants. A dozen ships at various stages of destruction, grounded in the tidal mud, their hulls split open like tin cans. You can walk through the interior of a supertanker here. You can stand in an engine room the size of a warehouse, in a corridor where the ceiling is 3 stories above your head, where the pipes are wider than you are. The ballast tanks, now empty, echo like cathedrals. This is Alang, the place where ships go to die. At its peak, this single beach, 12 kilometers of tidal mud on the coast of Gujarat, was recycling more steel than the entire nation of Belgium produces in a year. Not a factory, not a complex, a beach. Tens of thousands of workers with acetylene torches and sledgehammers and rope, dismantling vessels that weigh more than every car in Chicago combined. No cranes, no automation. Human beings in rubber boots working in tidal mud, cutting through steel 3 inches thick while the Arabian Sea comes in around their ankles. The steel that comes off these ships does not disappear. It flows straight back into the economy as rebar, as structural beams, as the raw material that holds up apartment buildings across South Asia. When you see construction in Mumbai or Dhaka, some of that steel was a tanker 18 months ago. The system is brutal. It is also genius. Nothing is wasted. The ocean gives, the beach takes. The steel is reborn. For 60 years, this system ran like a clock. Then, in 2022, someone stopped the clock. Here is the economics of a ghost ship. Follow this carefully because it is one of the most perfectly designed loopholes in the history of global trade. A tanker built in 2001 is now 24 years old, past its design life. Its hull has stress fractures that would fail any inspection in Rotterdam or Los Angeles. Its engine burns 30% more fuel than a modern vessel. Its emissions are illegal in every major Western port. The insurance, if you can even get it, costs more per year than the ship earns in revenue. In a normal world, the owner calls the breakers. The breakers offer $10 million based on the weight of the steel. The ship makes one last voyage under its own power, from wherever it is to the beach at Alang, and the owner walks away with $10 million and a tax write-off. Clean, simple, final. But here is what happened in February 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. Within weeks, the G7 imposed the most comprehensive sanctions on an oil-exporting nation in modern history. Russian crude, 11 million barrels a day, roughly 10% of everything the world burns, could no longer move on Western ships. It could not be insured by Western underwriters. It could not touch the Western financial system. Overnight, one of the largest oil export operations on the planet needed an entirely new delivery mechanism. And that mechanism needed one specific thing: ships that no one was watching. Not new ships. New ships come with Western financing, Western classification societies, Western insurance, Western records. Every inch of a new ship's history is traceable. What Russia needed were ships that were old enough, obscure enough, and disconnected enough from the Western financial world that no regulator would ever have a relationship with them. Ships that had already fallen off the radar of the legitimate market. The most available supply of exactly those ships was sitting in the queue for the scrapyard at Alang, a company registered in the UAE, owned by a holding structure in Oman, which traces back to a law firm's registered address in the British Virgin Islands, starts buying. Not one ship, not 10, hundreds. They are not buying ships. They are buying ghosts. They are paying 5 times scrap value for the age, the obscurity, the flags of convenience, the complete absence of any Western financial fingerprint. The ship that was the ocean pioneer in January becomes the Eastern Star by March and the Golden Wave by August. Same rusting hull, same cracked ballast tanks, same engine that burns fuel like a small power station. Different name, different flag, different owner on paper, and every time an investigator starts pulling on the ownership thread, the trail dissolves into a series of holding companies that were dissolved the week before. This is not innovation. This is the oldest trick in the history of commerce, applied to a 300-meter steel vessel carrying 2 million barrels of crude oil. Russia is not doing this alone. The architecture of the shadow fleet runs through the UAE, through Indian ports that receive the oil and blend it before resale, through Turkish straits that have become the busiest smuggling corridor in the world. Lloyd's of London estimates that over 600 tankers are now operating in this shadow network. 600 vessels. That is roughly 1 in every 12 tankers on the ocean. Moving sanctioned oil. Carrying no legitimate insurance. Traceable to no one. And every single one of them is a ship that should be on a beach in India right now. Now here's the part that reaches into your life. The breakers at Alang are not getting ships. The volume of vessels arriving for scrapping dropped by nearly 40% in the 2 years after 2022. The scrap dealers are offering more money per ton than at any point in the last decade. And still the ships are not coming, because the ships are worth more alive than dead, as long as Russian oil needs to move. When the supply of scrap steel falls by 40%, prices rise. Rebar costs more. Structural steel costs more. The construction industry across South Asia, which depends on recycled ship steel more than almost any other source, starts running over budget. Developers pass the cost to buyers. Buyers pass it to renters. The affordable housing project that was supposed to break ground this year gets delayed by 8 months because the numbers no longer work. You will never see that connection reported anywhere. No journalist will tell you that your rent went up because someone in a glass office tower in Dubai bought a ghost tanker to move Russian crude. But the chain is real. It is operating right now. And it runs directly from a sanctioned oil field in Siberia to a construction site 3 blocks from where you live. And the consequences do not stop there. Every ship being kept alive in the shadow fleet was designated by the industry as structurally marginal before it was purchased. These are not simply old ships. These are ships that classification societies, the organizations that certify whether a vessel is safe to operate, had already begun removing from legitimate service. Some have hull stress fractures. Some have ballast pumping systems held together with improvised repairs. Some have navigation equipment so outdated that the charts it uses have not been updated since before the smartphone existed. The Prestige. The Erica. Incident after incident in the history of catastrophic oil spills involved vessels at the end of their operational life, operated by entities with no meaningful insurance, in conditions where no Western authority was watching. The Prestige alone spilled 77,000 tons of oil along the Spanish and Portuguese coast. The cleanup cost over $2 billion. The Shadow Fleet is not borrowing ships from the future. It is borrowing the disasters that come with them. And here is the geometry of the problem that no one wants to say out loud. The 600 ghost ships now operating in this network are not evenly distributed across empty ocean. They are concentrated on the routes that matter. The Strait of Hormuz, where 40% of the world's seaborne oil passes through a waterway only 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. The Turkish Straits, where Russian crude exits the Black Sea through channels so narrow that ships pass within sight of apartment windows. The Strait of Malacca, where a quarter of global trade moves between water so shallow that a grounded tanker would block the entire route. One failure in the wrong place does not just spill oil, it closes the corridor, and closing the Strait of Hormuz, even for 72 hours, would trigger a price shock in every gas station on the planet, including yours. And when that ship fails, when the hull gives, when the pump fails, when the engine room floods, no one will know who owns it. The insurance certificate will trace to a policy that was never real, issued by a company that dissolved itself 6 weeks before the incident. The ownership documents will lead to an address in the British Virgin Islands that now belongs to a different holding company with a different name. The liability will evaporate into the ocean alongside the oil. The beach at Alang will still be there. The workers will still be in the mud. But instead of taking apart ships that lived full lives, they will eventually inherit a flood of vessels that were run to destruction, all arriving at once when the shadow fleet finally collapses, crashing steel prices, wiping out margins, laying off the very workers that the system was supposed to protect. The clock was stopped in 2022. The ships that were supposed to die are still sailing. The steel that was supposed to be reborn is waiting. And the recycling system that kept one of the world's most critical supply chains clean and closed has a hole in it the size of 600 tankers. The world figured out how to recycle ships. That took 60 years. What it has not figured out is what to do when the economics of war make recycling the wrong choice. Every ship gets scrapped eventually. The question is whether it happens on a beach in Gujarat, the way the system intended, or in a strait that the whole world depends on, in a way that no one planned for, and that no one will be left to pay for. What do you think? Can sanctions actually stop 600 ghost ships? Or has the Shadow Fleet already won? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to understand who actually owns the ports those ships are trying to avoid, the next video is already waiting for you.